Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting from central British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, today we got a very, very interesting guest. His name is Flemming. Deepaul is a disabled veteran who served in the U.S. Navy and a seasoned Native American holy man. A sacred title bestowed on him by his granddaughter Crow. With a lifetime devoted to spiritual service, Deepaul has investigated and cleansed in an untold number of haunted properties, encountering everything from mischievous, poltergeists, and dark entities. So a very, very interesting bio. Deepaul, start telling us a bit about your background. Where did it all start? How did you end up in the Navy? And tell us about your experience there, and then we'll take it from there. And then the other part, obviously very, very interesting, is your connection, obviously the history in particular in regards to spiritual services and all of those things.
Where do you want me to begin?
Tell us about your background.
So, I had a relatively interesting childhood, which kind of led me into a military at a young age. Did my ride in the service, tried to kill me a couple times, didn't take. And I kind of went about life from there. I'm not the greatest spokesman for my own story, but if you ask specifically what I've done, I'll do my best to answer you.
Yeah. So when did you get into? So where were you born in? Which region of the United States?
New England, East Coast of the USA.
Oh, okay. And then how old were you when you were? I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force, which was mandatory when I lived in Holland. When I was 18. And I was in it for 2.5 years, trained as special services in the Air Force. And then after 2.5 years, I came out. It was a very, very good experience, very learning experience for a young guy, just at the age that you think you know it all. And it kind of changes when they put you in the same room with 40 other guys that think they know it all too. So it was quite an experience for me, and still a very valuable one. Parts that I lived, I still use it even today at 85. It's still very much part of my life. I make my bed every morning. I always think I'm late, and in all the work that I still do, so it's all still part of my life. So tell me and tell our guests, when did you go? How old were you when you went into the U.S. Navy?
I was 17. I had I was getting encouragement from a gentleman in a shirt and tie, and he wore a black robe, sat up on an elevated bench, and kind of oversaw his flock of people who weren't necessarily there on their own volition. But that particular gentleman wanted to see my enlistment papers, and I was already downrange of joining the military, but that was the kind of catalyst to get me in when I did. So I joined at 17, did 6, got retired on injuries after that, and went through the VA process, which is an endeavor all by itself. Can you be specific about the
injuries? Or I don't want to dig into things that you don't want to talk about, but basically you became a disabled veteran. So can you relate to that a little bit more?
Well, I can give you one experience. I was, you see the picture behind me, a nuclear-powered submarine.
Right.
Doing transfers with a surface ship, and the two boats tried to turn me into chum for the local cuisine in the ocean, right? So I kind of got crushed and balled up and rolled around in the ocean. Next thing I knew, I was floating above the boat, watching them pull me out of the ocean, And a day or two goes by, and then I came around, and the operations never end. So I was either going to wake up in a bunk or get pulled out in the freezer one or the other. But that's one example of, my fun, right? Volunteer to see the world. I saw more than I bargained for.
Yeah, no kidding. Eh? So, and then the indigenous connection to me is very, very interesting because, as I indicated to you earlier, I was born in 1940 in northeastern Holland at the start of the Second World War, and obviously saw far too much that we should not have seen. But we were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945. When I was 5 years old, it made such an impression on me that I knew from that point forward, as I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And I did when I was 24, and coming to Canada, and then obviously Canada is a beautiful, beautiful country. And then the other part that I liked about it, I wanted to go into the lumber. My grandfather was a master carpenter. My dad worked in lumber. I started being trained as a furniture maker. Lumber and timber is a lot of fiber that grows in British Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful province. That's where I went to when I came in Vancouver, arrived in Vancouver, British Columbia. Couldn't speak English. Actually, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job, and went to the immigration department and couldn't speak English. Fortunately, there was a German fellow I could speak a little bit of German. And so I told him what I wanted to do. I want to build a lumber mill. He said, go to Prince George. That is 500 miles north of Vancouver, or 800 kilometers for our European friends. And that's where I went, on the bus, the Greyhound bus. And I'm still in Prince George. And Prince George is in the center of British Columbia, north to south, east to west. Came off the bus with my suitcase. I had 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and then I had money, not much money. I couldn't speak language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. I counted my money. I wanted to build a lumber mill. I counted my money. I had $25.47. And so, but what I did have is attitude. I've always been positive. Then passion, whatever I do, I give it 125%, and work ethic. Even now, at 85, I still work. I get up usually at 5:30 in the morning, and then, as I said earlier to you, I always make my bed and I always think I'm late. And I love it, and had the opportunity to build different companies and enjoyed it, and so that's still what I'm doing today. And so that's kind of where I'm at and where I'm coming from. But the interesting experience was I obviously read about the makeup of Canada in particular and the indigenous population in Canada. I was not familiar with other than reading it in books. And as you well know, the indigenous population is a big part of the history, and still is today, of Canada in the United States, and so I learned a lot about it, still employed a lot of them, worked with them in different businesses, and still am quite involved with them here in Canada in particular, and in BC, in the northern BC area, very, very frequently and very, very much. So that then being said, that's my experience with it. And then the other part is we were liberated by the Canadian Army. 5% of the Canadian Army was the indigenous population as well, that are still being remembered. On Indigenous Veteran Day is November the 8th here in Canada. I don't know if they're celebrating that in the United States or not, but it's a very, very important day for the Canadians.
Heck of a story.
Yeah, so the indigenous population in particular, so what draws my attention to it is that when I read your bio, Deepal, then I see the Native American holy man. I'd like you to explain your background or your interpretation of that. A sacred title bestowed upon him by his granddaughter Crow, and that is part correct me if I'm wrong, of the indigenous history that goes back thousands of years in North America. Is that all part of your granddaughter bestowing up on you, a sacred title? Tell us about that. A little bit of the history and the indigenous growing up in that culture, which is still very, very much part of all of us in North America, in the United States, and in Canada.
Well, Granddaughter Crow is a Navajo. She's half Navajo and ironically half Dutch.
Oh, interesting.
Her native name is taken after her grandfather. She is Granddaughter Crow. That's her indigenous name. As she says, her Dutch name is Dr. Joy Gray. Okay. This is one of her most recent books, or I should say her most recent book, Shamanism and the Shadow. She bestowed that title on me of seasoned holy man some time ago. When I was doing some things with her, and I was reluctant to accept it, but kind of like a compliment, right? You don't turn down a compliment or you disrespect the messenger. So the title was bestowed upon me, and I understand why, right? But I reluctantly accept it because it keeps on a lot more responsibility towards what I do and how I do things.
So, what does it really mean in terms of if you suggest that it takes on more responsibility? Is that then, in which way, is it directly connected to, as you indicated in your bio, Native American holy man? Is it directly connected to that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, my body of work over my lifetime falls directly in line with what a Native American holy man would have done in, ancient times or present times, So in my bloodline, where I have one grandfather who landed on the beach in Normandy, walked to Germany and 2nd Mechanized Division. And then the only thing he bitched about was having to walk back to France to get on a boat. So,
Yeah.
Of course, they bypassed the 180,000 Germans that were occupying Holland until the forces flew in, right? And then, the Canadian division went ahead and liberated where you are. My other grandfather jumped reservation, joined the military, the Navy, in the 1930s, claimed he was white, right? Because in that time, blacks, Native Americans, and so on, were relegated to mess cooks and stewards' mates. He retired in 1965 as a lieutenant.
Wow.
Where my great grandmother jumped reservation and gave birth to him on the North Platte River. Not all that far relative to the Canadian line. But the title of being a holy man to me is a very sacred honor. One that I at times question if I'm worthy. But again, I think any good person that focuses on the spirit world is constantly questioning whether they're worthy to, be able to see the things that I see or to, move light, God's light the way that I do, from healing, to taking darkness away from people, places, things. Taking darkness away, that's kind of fun to me, but it's all part of the package.
So, and then the cleansing of untold number of haunted properties, is that also part of that?
So again, the title of holy man is only defined by the folks around you, if you will, right? If you say priest or reverend or father, right? It speaks to something religious, but you'd have to do a little more digging to get more information on it, right? same thing. I'm just an intensely spiritual person who just happens to have a lot of connections in the spirit world, which through a lot of work, I'm a hollow bone able to move and communicate from the spirit world into the world of the living.
So
The basic definition of a shaman is a messenger, someone who goes the intermediary between the spirit world and the living.
So if you look at yourself, as you indicated in your bio, you consider yourself, you're guided by the Christian faith. However, but you follow in looking back at the holy world, the spiritual path as a, now I don't quite get that name right, Heyoka, healer and seer.
Yeah, 3 different things: Heyoka, healer, seer. A Heyoka is someone who kind of shakes things up, right? Someone who will look at the tribe, the village, the community, a person, and bring out different perspectives, different points of view. Right? It is certainly someone who is not one with the crowd, always on the outside looking in, if you will. Right? A seer is somebody who can see the spirit world, right? Or I was on a podcast a few days ago with a guy in Australia, and I can see inside of him. And his wife reached out shortly and said, what do we got to do? To get him to a doctor because he's got problems with his chest. Same thing with his throat. So I see a lot of things, everything from spirits and ghosts to cancer, to pain. Sometimes I see Da Vinci's picture of a man, right? Except I see the outline of the body and I can see the nervous system, the bones, skeleton, and I see these spots on people, and I can also see evil, darkness.
So you can see me now better. At some point, I'm wondering what you see. I'm not putting you on the spot, obviously, but I find it very interesting.
You can't put me on the spot. You can't put me on the spot.
Okay.
Okay. I don't
say
have
that respectfully, right?
I understand, but what I'm saying to you, you can't put me on the spot. Either God tells me what I'm seeing, or He doesn't. It's that simple.
Right.
Okay? I don't make things up. I don't.
No.
My books are not fiction. A lot of people think I write fiction, but I don't write fiction.
Right.
But when I see people and I want to look, or they ask, right, I see things that, and I will tell people what I see, and more times than not, it'll piss them off.
Oh, now I'm even more interested to wonder what you see at some point.
I bet you are. I bet you are.
Yeah.
I've looked at people. You ready? You ready for this one?
Yeah.
I've looked at people and I've said flat out, and I'm not saying this about you, sir. You're a pedophile. Okay? Because when I look at them, I can see their soul. And I can see everything that they don't want people to know. Okay?
Okay.
So when I look at them, I can tell you instantly, good or bad, right? And where they fit in that spectrum. Whether they have darkness attached to them, whether they've done things, that they shouldn't. And I'm talking about bad things, right? Because believe it or not, everything is energy. And when you're holding in guilt or, other emotions, I can read those things. And this one will really get you, John. I can tell what people are thinking. I can tell what people think of me.
I like that.
I've done this on podcasts. I've done 50 or 60 podcasts in the last 6-8 weeks, right? And time again, I look at people and I'll tell them, I'll say, listen, there's no need to be afraid of me. Okay. I know certain folks are that come on the show. I was on a show with a guy in Canada, and he flat out said, he goes, I'm terrified to talk to you. And I said, I understand. And he said, why? Because when you connect with me, your soul is exposed. And nobody wants their soul exposed.
Why?
Well, because most people think that what they do will be forgotten or is forgotten. Never is. Everything you do in your existence is recorded. Okay? That recording stays with you.
I like
And
it.
it's an imprint on your soul.
I like
Right?
it.
So when people do good shit, their existence glows.
Right.
When people do stupid shit, illegal shit, or in the case of people who are pedophiles, okay, it's like looking at an energy that's pure sticky tar. Okay. And when I can see these things, I look a little bit deeper and I can hear what they don't want anybody knowing. I went into a hotel room not too long ago, and as soon as I walked through the door, all I heard was murder, 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 murder. Well, there was somebody murdered in that room, and there was half a dozen spirits trying to battle this dead being from talking. Okay, such is the life of a holy man.
My goodness. Well, I'm not afraid of it, Deepal. So nobody is perfect, but I'm at peace with who I am in my world, and at 85, and looking forward to giving back to the community, do all those other kind of things. But it's not in my story. My life is the history of who I am. So all the way back, going back to 1940. But I understand where, when I looked at your bio, it got my interest, in particular, looking at some of the words in there. Poltergeist was something I was not familiar with, although I believe it's a German word. And dark entities so powerful that his own life has been placed in danger on more than one occasion. So tell me a little bit more about that in terms of poltergeist. What does everything from mischievous poltergeist to dark entities? What are you referring to?
Well, poltergeist kind of is one of the most common phrases that people work. And you're right, it is a German, the word is German oriented. But when you say poltergeist, people kind of immediately click to some of the horror and suspense movies that are out there. And, everything seems to be a poltergeist. So when something gets thrown across the room, or shit floats in a room, or, something gets thrown at somebody, they say, oh my God, it's a poltergeist. Again, they might not be wrong. But again, at a young age, things like that used to scare the crap out of me, right? But then as I figured out how the world works and how the spirit world works, and I realized what an actual poltergeist is nothing more than a ball of dark energy, and how to get rid of it and so on. It became, kind of monotone, like I'm being right now, which I probably should raise my energy to help your podcast along here, right? But I've dealt with a lot of poltergeists. They're not that big of a deal. Some of the other darker entities that I've bumped into are pretty terrifying. My wife is a good gauge of how evil some of the stuff that I've bumped into is, but it doesn't really register with me. I don't really fear it anymore, and that's a point of concern for some of the folks that are around me. That and I have a healthy respect for all, but it doesn't really bother me. But I've dealt with a few things that could have gone either way. And then I'll tell you this story of the people ask me all the time, what's the most terrifying thing I've dealt with, right? And my short answer is, well, it's the living, okay, because they are just unpredictable, right? Spirit world's kind of easy to figure out, at least it is for me. But the one thing that shook me to my core, and never again did I question my faith or the abilities and gifts that I've been given. It was having one of those I'm sick of this shit moments a couple decades ago. And you see ghosts every day, and you hear people talking, and you see portals and all this stuff. It can wear on you, right? Especially if you don't have a lot of training and understanding what's going on. Most of this stuff I had to figure out myself, right? So, a couple decades ago, I decided that I'm gonna use my free will and say I don't want this stuff anymore. Now, before I say this, I've got to do this. Great Spirit, draw a circle around this time and this space, and it is sacred. And what I am saying is a relay of what happened, not what should ever happen again. So in my pity party, I decided to push away all my protection. Okay, and I'm surrounded by a lot of God's protection. Okay. When I did that, and again, I'm giving you the cliff notes here. When I did that, in all my abundance of stupidity, okay, I could feel anything and everything that is good that you've ever known in your existence. I could feel it being pulled away from me. Okay. And all of us have been alone at some point in time. All of us have been in a quiet space where we've been like, I am alone, right? I have never felt such a feeling of being alone when I demanded through all of our free will, right? That all of my protection, all God's light and everything that's around me get pushed back. And about 3 seconds into that encounter of feeling everything moving away and loneliness creeping in comes this serpent-like snake creature. It just floated about 10 feet across from me. And the second that thing entered the space, that feeling of loneliness turned to the most vile expression of hate and evil and all things imaginable that are unimaginable. Okay? No movie, no director, no actor could possibly replay what that piece of pure evil was about. And it kept saying one message: I'm taking your soul. And as it slithered around that room and I could feel its energy building and mine decreasing, I realized in a heartbeat how badly I screwed up. If I could have, I would have dropped to my knees. Okay. I wasn't in a position to drop to my knees. But my mouth and my mind instantly begged God to forgive me for being so stupid. Well, the damage was already done. It was inside my protection. So I called in Archangel Michael, begged all of my angels around me to deal with this. And they did. And I watched the first true battle of good and evil, where I understood what was at stake, my soul. Okay. Once they dealt with that, that was it. That was a game changer. And I said, I understand my path. Well, I don't understand it, but I accept it. Right. And that's where I really hunkered down and went down my red road, learned and continue to learn what I need to know and do so that I can best serve Great Spirit, God, whatever it is that you call divine.
So it was at this period when, in a sense of loneliness, the worst you have felt, this thing came towards you, whatever it was, came towards you to take control of your soul. And so you have
possession,
either
not control. Possession.
either he whatever it is did or he didn't, at which point you would be dropping, if the opportunity was there, the setting was not correct, on your knees and ask for help because you were going into a direction that obviously was not a good one. And then, if I have this correct, then after this happened, you gathered and other people came around you and created this sense of support, if you wish, or purpose, maybe, in a way. And this only happened once, that this
Yeah, I think you're underselling it.
Okay.
Okay, so let me rephrase.
Yeah.
The dumbest thing I ever did was step away from God. The second I did that, darkness filled that void.
Right.
Now, because of what and who I am, I've always been a target for darkness. They are desperate for my soul. They want to shut me up, period. Okay? Well, I gave them the opening. And it wasn't the living that came to my aid. It was spiritual warfare,
Okay.
white light, dark energy that went to war once I begged God to forgive me for my mistake. Okay. And I accept my role as who and what I am. I learned my lesson not to fuck around with my free will or my soul.
Right. But
That dark entity was coming to take my soul. And that's the lesson I desperately try to impart on all people.
the dark entity is still there even for you, but you don't allow it to come in. Or to
Well, the
say-
dark.
I'm trying to
I'm
understand.
not sure where you stand on white light and dark energy. So, I'm trying to tailor this more towards you and your audience. So help me understand your belief or your impressions of white and dark, positive and negative, good and bad.
So, yeah, this may sound, from my perspective, I haven't given much thought to that in my 85 years. Other than when I was very young, I was scared of the dark because of the war years that were all around us, likely. But not other than that. I have not really spent a whole lot of time thinking about it.
Well, imagine what what you saw, the German soldiers and the Canadians and so on. Okay, now just convert that into a spirit world. There really isn't that much difference, okay,
Right.
except for the ability or the amount of power that reigns, if you will. So take any battle you ever want to recall or witness, okay, or of, and take that and implant it into the spirit world. And that's what I watch. That's what I watched on that particular day. But it's something I've seen many, many times. Okay, a battle of good over evil.
Yeah, and I have likely seen that as well in the 85 years that I've lived. So the very, very interesting, and your approach to it is, I was not afraid about podcasting you, and because I'm interested in who you are different, you are special. I'm not trying to make you feel good, but I'm simply saying my observation was that what was interesting is that, you're obviously the Navy and you're a disabled veteran, but more importantly to me, what was interesting is the holy world as to what place it took and your ability to see in the world and see in individuals or situations where you could be seeing things that others didn't or don't, and then be open about it and candid about it and speaking about it and writing about it as well. So so through Great Spirit Speaks and your books in particular, I had a copy of. Can you show us your book there once more, Dr. Deepal?
Yeah, so this is my most recent book, Mysteries at the Wyndham Inn.
Okay, so
Right.
have you done 2 books, 3 books? How many books have you done? That's the.
I've got two series out there. One's the Crazy series, and this is talking about my life starting out as a child and the crazy stepfather I had that used to beat the crap out of me.
Oh my God! So 20. So why do you call it two? What do you call it there? 242.
2,442 steps to crazy. The beginning.
Oh, okay. So what does the
This book actually sold pretty well in Holland, by the way.
Yeah, it does. So it's on Amazon and all the other ones, and international as well, right?
Oh yeah, well, that was a bestseller. Book 2 on that I've got to finish it and get it out. Book 2 on Mysteries at the Wyndham Inn comes out here shortly. But I've written books on veterans and my time in the service. I wrote a book on a date with suicide. And I've spoken to fellow vets throughout the world. As a podcaster out in UK, Suicide Sucks. She's doing a hell of a job, on her format. But everything that I do, everything is all tied back to serving God.
So one of the questions that I have is that how did you become a writer and a seasoned holy man is one of the questions.
Yeah, so a writer, that's a question in and of itself. There is no way on this planet that I ever saw me as a published author, let alone a best-selling author with multiple genres, right? Why? Why did I never see me as an author? I barely get out of high school, and I mean barely, right? I worked full-time my senior year, so I would work third shift, go to school at 7 o'clock, take a shower, go to school half the day, go home, sleep, So my path wasn't as an academic, someone who can write, right? So as I like to tell people, I could barely read until I was, well into my 40s. I never needed to, never really paid much attention to it. And writing, forget about it. I'm dyslexic. I can't spell to save my life. And I couldn't tell you the difference between an adjunct professor and a pronoun, right? Just not what I know. But the message kept coming through in a very simple fashion. Spirit world kept flashing the feather at me and telling me, you need to write, you need to write, you need to write. And I said, I'm not writing. I'm not doing it. I don't want to tell these stories. I don't want to tell about my childhood and my abuse and what I survived and so on. And once again, the baby Jesus overruled my logic, right? And said, sit the hell down and start telling these stories. And that's how it kind of came about. I mean, with the internet and all the things that go on there, it makes it 1,000 times easier for someone who, struggling like me.
So telling just a little bit about me then, other than what I did already, I'm working on my 6th book. And for me, it was not easy either. Already I was here for a long time. I was nearly 70. And people said to me already a long time ago, they said, you had such an interesting life, John. You should write a book about it. Well, as you well know, writing books is not easy. So the first book that I wrote is Against All Odds. And very, very popular. And it's not about how successful John is, just the opposite, going through all the ups and downs all along the way. This one took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2.5 years to write it. And then the second book that you may find interesting that I did, academically, I was not a success story either. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said, what are we going to do with this guy? And my parents were beautiful people, and some people suggested send him to the mentally challenged school. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. So at 12 and a half years old, they said, what are we going to do with this guy? My dad had a friend that had a furniture factory, and he said, let's make him a furniture maker. And all of a sudden, the kids that I grew up with and the teachers said, John will not amount to much because he's not bright enough. So we find him a job where he can use his hands. And so that's what I did. But then, as I said to you earlier on, we were liberated by the Canadian Army as part of the Allied forces that landed in Normandy in June. The Americans want east and south. The Canadians want north through France, Belgium, then Holland on the west coast, and to the north where we lived, 10 minutes from the German border, and and so we were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945. And I knew seeing far too much people dragged out of their houses, people being killed and shot, and hunger and all of those things. But going back to my studies or academically, I always knew I was just as smart as the others. And my dream was to go to Canada, and then the other dream was to start with nothing as I came to Canada from the ground up and show to me that I was just as smart as anybody, not smarter than, but that I could do it. And it took me then, I was already here for 32 years. In 1997, I came here in 1965 with nothing, $25.47. I went into a bookstore, DePaul, here in 1997. I was already 57 years old, and I picked up a book. And the book that I picked up this is the actual book. Driven to Distraction, written by Edward Halliwell, medical doctor, professor, written 18 books, speaker around the world. And the book, this is the actual book that I picked up. And the book was about ADHD and dyslexia. I am ADHD and have dyslexia. When I read the book and started looking at it, it was implied then that it was a mental disorder, maybe of some sort. So I wrote in it in Dutch, January 1997. Now I finally know who I am. And the more I got to know about it, and the more I started reading about it, Googling about it, and then it took me 5 years before I would go to my doc, who delivered our two daughters, was a personal friend, and he said, when I was 62, he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we checked it out, and I do. And the more I found out about it, the more I thought that if you have ADHD, dyslexia, but in particular ADHD, it can be a superpower. And it has been for me, because the more I found out about it, and as people say to me now, you have 10 different companies, it's not about that. It's not about money. Money is not important. But I'm busy. I do podcasting. I do writing books. I do presentations and all the other things. And people say to me, how do you do it? I say ADHD. That's how I do it. And so I wrote a book about that. ADHD, Unlocked is an important one for me, and that's why I wrote it. Very popular book, actually, as well. So it adds a little bit more about
Elon Musk. Elon Musk. Right?
Yes.
Look at the issues that man has, and look at how brilliant he is. Okay, people tell me all the time that I'm one of the smartest people they ever met. I don't feel that way. Okay, but again, I don't spend much time thinking about it. But I agree with you. These are superpowers.
Say DePaul, and that's why I'm all excited about this now, because the last book that I wrote, I'm working on that other one. The last one that I wrote is this one, $1 Billion Communication Skills. And this talks about 6 or 7, very briefly, about how did they become billionaires? Because they acquired the ability to have communication skills. And most of them have neurodiversity issues of some description or another, including Elon Musk and the other ones. And I felt I had to write a book about it because and I take the risk of being presumptuous, but you have different ideas. It scares some people looking at your bio, but what makes you effective, in my opinion, you have very good communication skills, which for me...
I'm as authentic as it gets.
And so for me, it's the same. I'm a storyteller. But the biggest challenge for me has been throughout my life is to figure out, who am I? Although everybody said, oh, you're so successful and blah, 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 blah. It took me until I saw this book that it put on the light, ADHD and Dyslexia. Dr. Halliwell, ADHD and Dyslexia. And so can you imagine, and you can, I know, that I went to my doc to be diagnosed ADHD when I was 62. I left school at 12 and was looked at not smart enough and will never amount to anything, as was told by, with all due respect to teachers. John will not ever amount to much. And so it took me 50 years, from 12 and a half years old, being a laborer, being looked down on, until I read this book and said, oh my God, that's me. And so the more I found out that, I then felt I had an obligation to share, not my success, it's not about money, it's about who am I? And so many people with neurodiversity issues or other issues trying to figure out who am I, to share with them, and hopefully not saying, oh, John is so great, or John, we feel sorry. No, that's not what it's about. But that you can be done. Stay the course, believe, and find out who are you. That's for me was important. And the last book, the one that I wrote, $1 Billion, I'm writing another one that says that you can. Everybody can. And saying, stay the course, believe in who you are, and then go forward.
Well said.
So that's at least a bit of my background. So now, tell us more about what caused you to, and I'm looking at some of the questions that come to mind, but what caused you to come forward and tell your story, really? Because it must have taken, and you already shared part of that with us, obviously, because of being, by Crow, your granddaughter, to be bestowed the holy man is one, and then the other one is you didn't have an easy upbringing, and so, but then being active as a communicator. I'm a storyteller. You are, in terms of the books that you have written, in terms of the presentations that you make, and as you do now, and as I do, podcasting is still only on its infancy as we speak, because as you and me are sitting here speaking about different issues, our own personal experience as to what was our life, what is our life now, in the past, as we go forward, that it will explode as we go forward for more and more millions of people around the world, as you do and as I do. Tomorrow I may be podcasting somebody from the Philippines, the next day maybe Greece, Athens, who knows, on all kinds of different topics. And I believe that that has been one of the greatest platforms, podcast, to share our ideas, no commercials, but just straight from the heart, with others from around the world, and hopefully, from my perspective, it will create inspiration to others, not only from my story, but from the guests that have chosen to be on my podcast.
Do you want me to go back to the beginning of that and try to answer a question, or wait for a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I think you asked me how I ended up where I am. Or actually, I'm not sure. What the heck was your question?
Well, I said, what caused you to come forward and tell your story?
Oh.
Because that's not easy to write. Writing is not easy. To go out and tell your story is not easy. At least it wasn't for me.
So, the first book I wrote, right, Steps to Crazy. Okay. Telling that story, I think I wrote it and threw it away 6 times, right? But when I published it, I took the finished book, and I handed it to my wife, right? And I said to her, "Buckle up." So she takes the book. Now, why am I saying that to you? Why did I hand her the book? Because I never said a word about my childhood, never. And we raised 6 kids. as I like to say, my wife and I have been together for 50 years with the wind chill, 37, 38 or so without the wind chill, right? You know, but I never said a word about my childhood. Nothing. Nothing. So I handed her the book. She started reading it. And again, you read this book, it's gonna suck you in quickly, right? It's got a hell of a read to it. Well, my wife stopped talking to me. And when she looked at me, she would just start crying. I knew why, right? So a handful of days goes by, she finishes the book, and when she finally could talk to me, she just said, "I am so sorry. I didn't know any of that happened to you." I said, "Yeah, all right." And then she said, "You weren't abused. You were tortured." And when she said that, I had to draw back and think about it. I'm like, you know, no, that's true. Okay. So that statement and the change that happened between my wife and I when I told her, you know, when I handed her the book, okay, made me begin to understand the breadth and depth of the importance of telling one's story. And of course, you put out your personal stuff out there, right? Things that happen to you. And we always expect the worst, you know? People are going to blah, blah, blah. Well, to my great shock, when this thing became a bestseller and the responses that I was getting from people were stunning. And I mean stunning. The reviews speak volumes for this book. So if you want to look at some reviews, go to Amazon. The people that came to me and said, "Thank you for telling your story because ... right? And then they go in and start opening up about what happened to them. And then the veteran community started coming forward, right? And then the traumas of their childhood and the military and all that started to play out in how I could further help my fellow veterans. But at the end of the day, most of us, especially men, hold in all of their stories, all the abuse that they've been through in life, all the disrespect, all the troubles, especially that go along with raising a family, right?
All the
As
trauma.
good men continue to take in other people's tough times, especially the wife, the kids, they all come to you, right? And they very rarely open up and tell their stories. Well, now we are. So I wrote the book because God told me to, period. And I wasn't about to go to heaven and deal with the baby Jesus again, you know, and say, "All right, well, I didn't do half of the things I was supposed to, so let me get this shit done."
I like it, Deepal. I did the same for the same reasons as you did. Is that I did this when I was 72. I started with this much earlier, on and on, went through it 20 years, on and on. Then my wife, myself, been together for over 42 years, and saying that, showed it to her, and again, the same happened as what happened in your case. And you say, you must write this, you must explore it further, and you must share it with others. And I did, and it became success. And then that inspired me to say that the other one that I did then is when I found that I had ADHD and dyslexia and did not realize how the frequency of occurrence of this around the world can well be up to 25-30% of the population, and it's really not talked about it all that much in the last number of years, but it was part of my life, and I call it a superpower. And so, and then from there on, I started to write other books as well, sharing with others, you know, and it has been inspiring for me to be part of that, not for the money part, but simply sharing with others. And then podcasting became just part of the evolution of storytelling with likewise individuals of around the world. And so that part has been very, very important to me.
Sounds like we've walked and are walking a similar path.
Yeah. Deepak, it was an amazing podcast. I hope that you still haven't told me what you saw yet in me, but maybe you will before we go. So for all those people watching us, share with us your website, Deepak, or where to get your books on all the popular sites, I believe, the books that you have now with Amazon and all the other ones where it is available. And then watch for Deepak's podcasting, subscribe to him, share it with others, like it if you like it, inspire us to do more of what we are doing, with other people around the world.
So you can find my books on Amazon. I shut down my website and a few other things because it was getting out of control, in a good way. So we got some folks putting it back together, but some of the stuff I get into has caught a lot of attention, and I'm trying to manage that intention, if you will, or attention, I should say.
Yeah.
You can find my stuff on Amazon, and if you want to do a live show sometime, John, you bring on some guests, and I can tell you things about those folks just by looking at them. I won't put you on the spot. Maybe we'll do something off air. But one of the things I do enjoy doing is looking at folks I've never met before and telling them things about themselves that either will piss them off or make them smile. But
Yeah.
other than that, I've had a great time on your show.
I really appreciate you being on my show. I want to stay in touch with you, Deepak. And so let's make sure, I'm going to mention to Scott, who made the connection, that about 3, 4, 5 months from now, maybe.
You got time for one more short story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. So I'm hearing that you and your audience needs to hear this story. Okay. One of the things that I'm very gifted with is the ability to move specific light, such as healing. Right? I've got a lot of angels around me, and they're constantly looking to be kept busy, if you will. Give you an example. Some years ago, my wife's company hired a fellow vet. That vet and I was helping him with vet things and dealing with the VA and so on, but he worked for my wife and her company. He calls me up out of the blue and says, listen, I've been taking some time off, and I don't want to piss off your wife, but I need to approach her and take some more time off. Can I talk with you? And I said, fine. So we met, and he said, my wife is pregnant. And as soon as he starts talking, as is the case often, I see these bubbles, these images pop up. And in those bubbles, what people are saying or thinking or not saying, but trying to hide in their mind, they pop up in these bubbles. Well, I can also see what people are talking about. So in this particular young man's example, his wife, I believe she was 6 months pregnant. They had to go for an abortion. And as he's telling me this, I can see the baby in the womb. And the baby looks like roadkill. All right. I mean, I can see the body parts, and there's intestines and blood. I mean, that's gross, right? But I can see what he's talking about. So again, when people try to lie to me, it doesn't go very well, okay? Because I can see their energy, or I can see what they're saying or what they're not saying. So this young veteran says him and his wife are scheduled to have an abortion, his dead baby taken out of the woman the next day, and he needed that day off. And as he's telling me this, I'm seeing, some things that I'm kind of indicating for me what to do. So I said, well, hold on a second. Let me do something. I'm going to get back to you. So Spirit World told me what to do as a hollow bone, right? So I went home, grabbed the hold of a malachite crystal, put it in my palm, meditated, did what I did, listened to the Spirit World, lined up all the connections, and then went back and saw him. And I asked him one question. Does your wife have faith? And he says, well, she's kind of religious. I'm like, does she have something that she believes in? And he says, yes. Again, doesn't matter to me whether it's baby Jesus, Buddha, or just bubblegum that you happen to think rules the world, right? Something, right? So I said, the stone, go to your wife, put it in her hand, close her fingers, tell her to pray and to tell God or whatever she believes in what it is she wants to happen. Okay. Of course, this veteran's looking at me like, I just walked on the moon, right? And he was there to witness it. And I said, sometimes you just have to do things without question, called faith. Right? He said, okay. Actually, he said, yes, sir. Left. Right? Late the next day, I'm at my wife's office, and we're actually out in the parking lot. And then you can hear the kid's truck, barreling down the road, pulls into the parking lot, comes out of the truck. Man, this guy was as emotional as it gets. He's mad. He's excited. He's crying. He's yelling. What the did you do to that rock? What did you do? Tears coming down. And I had to put my hand up and say, that's close enough. Okay? Because he had so much energy around him, it's starting to overwhelm me. It wipes away the tears. And I said, did you do what I told you to do? He said, yes, sir. I went home. I cupped it in my wife's hand. She stayed up all night in the rocking chair in the room with us. They don't have any children yet. Where this baby was their baby room, right? Again, she was roughly 6 months pregnant. He said she stayed there all night long until he had to pull her out of that chair and take her to this appointment. When they get to the appointment, the nurse does an ultrasound and the jelly thing, right? And all she said was, oh my. Puts the receiver down, the monitor thing. Comes back with a doctor. Doctor does the same thing, except he doesn't say, oh my. Another doctor comes in. Then the chief of surgery comes in, does the full imaging, looks at the two of them, and says, well, unless you guys want to abort a perfectly healthy baby, you won't need an abortion today. The baby went from being roadkill 24 hours later to being a perfectly healthy child.
Amazing.
The power of prayer, the responsibility and understanding of being a seasoned Native American holy man. The heart of that story is what I call a hollow bone. The ability to move and channel Great Spirit's energy, love, healing, compassion, calm. That is a gift that I have been given. It is a gift I take with great responsibility. And I caution you and everybody in between. Do not think I hold any power. I am simply a hollow bone with connections. It's up to you and what you believe in. That is the end game, just like this young couple. My power does not help that baby. My power simply aligns things so that they can do what they want, their free will, not mine. The baby was born healthy. And last I heard, all is well. This is many, many years ago. But that's one story of many, many, many stories.
Amazing.
Does that help you with a little better understanding of what a true seasoned Native American holy man?
Yes, it does, Deepal. And I'm sure it has been, especially the ending part of it, in particular for the people watching us from around the world, making it understand the power of the holy man and going back to the indigenous histories behind it, being very, very powerful, very, very important. Deepal, it was an amazing podcast. I hope you enjoyed being part of my podcast as well. And let's make sure we stay in touch.
Well, I'm sure we'll be doing more, right? keep the faith. Keep moving forward.
Thanks, Deepal. Take care.